3 BlackBerries, 2 phones, West Wing ID and key to the Underground Command Center, passes to the Pentagon and State Department, Camp David Guard Station ID, West Wing parking pass, wallet, and keys. That's what would be in the $2,000 Dior purse of a female White House Chief of Staff. And how do we know this? We know it because Nicolle Wallace, the novelist, tells us. What enables her to provide such vivid and realistic details? The experience of Nicolle Wallace, the White House insider, who served as communications director for the White House and the re-election campaign of President George W. Bush. In her White House role, she was described by the Washington Post as, quote, a voice for more openness with reporters, and by former colleagues as very persuasive in the halls of the West Wing. She's now the best-selling author of 18 Acres, on sale in the foyer, and you'll have an opportunity later if you'd like a signed copy. And she's a political commentator. She appears frequently on television programs such as ABC's Good Morning America, Fox News' Sean Hannity, and then Morning Joe on MSNBC. She's also a contributor to the Daily Beast. Nicolle Wallace served as senior advisor for the McCain-Palin campaign in 2008, appearing frequently on network and cable news programs as the campaign's top spokeswoman and defender. She has a few scars from that. She is a California native, graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, and Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, which she attended. She lives today in New York City, often goes to Central Park, often drives to Connecticut with her husband and a dog. And she walks that dog for 2 hours at a time, so she is a good dog mother. This is her second talk in this room today, since she's part of a program that introduces some of our students at Rutgers who are studying women in American politics to the realities of politics through the eyes of women leaders. For this one, we've asked her to tell us a bit about both Washingtons for tonight, the real one where she worked and the one she created in her novel. It's my personal pleasure and delight to welcome to the Eagleton podium Nicolle Wallace.
That's yours. You don't need notes. Well, if anything in that first description of the BlackBerries and the $2,000 purse was fiction, it was the $2,000 purse. I never had one of those. But I thought, this is my story. I can make it, I can make the purse whatever I want it to be. So I get a lot of questions about the purse. And the question is always rooted in, a little bit of anger, like, why does she have to have a Dior purse? And I always say, she didn't have to. She chose to have that purse. So thank you so much for coming out. I know there are other things to do in the evening, and I appreciate you being here, and thank you. I see all the books out there. Thank you very much. I wrote this book because after spending 15 years in the trenches, I decided that it was time to see if I could do something to contribute to the culture and not the real-life world of politics. I also wrote this book because it was at the end of my career where I first witnessed any limitations or discrimination or complications that I could link to my gender. I went to work for Jeb Bush as his press secretary when I was 25. And whatever you think of them, Jeb and George Bush run women-dominated political organizations. In George Bush's White House in 2001, Condi Rice was the national security advisor, Karen Hughes, the communications director, Mary Madeline sort of ran everything. Margaret Tutwiler told us where we were and what we were doing. And Laura Bush was the most powerful figure in the entire 18-acre complex, hands down. So in the Bush White House, she's sort of worried about the guys more than the girls. It was at the end of I worked for George W. Bush for 6 years. I am very proud of my service for him, and I was just in West Texas, where all the Bushes are beloved, and they said, how's it going for him? And I said, to me, the sign is in Manhattan, people actually have started to come up to me and whisper, he was pretty nice, wasn't he? And I say, yeah, he was really nice. And they look around to make sure no one can hear them, and they say, I really like the way he's treated Obama. I say, yeah, he's like that. And then they'll look around to make sure their spouse and none of their friends can hear the conversation, and they'll say, was he as fun as he seems? I say, yes, he was. So I feel like history always comes around, and presidents kind of look better in the rearview mirror. But instead of being satisfied with what was a near idyllic professional experience for George W. Bush, where I served as White House Communications Director in 2005 and 2006 and worked my way up during the first term, I thought I'd go in for one more campaign joyride. So in 2008, John McCain called, I answered, and found myself on a campaign plane that was nothing like Air Force One. Campaigning for re-election on Air Force One is a luxury ride. It's like the difference between a Four Seasons and a Ritz-Carlton and a Holiday Inn. So there I was on the McCain plane, which didn't always take off or land on time because things didn't work very well. And he went and picked the first woman that our party has picked as vice president, which was a thrill of a lifetime. I'd never worked for a female politician in my 13 years in politics at that time. To say that experience was life-changing would be an understatement, and if I said it was all positive and happy, that would be a lie. Working for Sarah Palin was my first experience with ending up in the news cycle myself. I worked for the Bushes, who really taught you that staff was to keep their head down and to stay out of the news. And I'd never been the subject of any scandal or controversy until Sarah Palin pointed the finger at me for buying all those fancy suits. I would have gladly bought her fancy suits, but I was busy writing her convention speech. So I thought it was pretty funny, and here's what I learned from that. If you work for a female candidate and she wears skirts, suspect number one is the staffer who also wears skirts. And if you are used to all the protections usually afforded to you, like innocent until presumed guilty, if shopping's involved, the girl must have done it. So I started thinking about women in politics, and I realized how naive I'd been. And I thought back to the Democratic primary, where I had this feeling that I was watching something extraordinary. But because I'm a Republican, I didn't feel like it was really any of my business to get involved. But I had watched the treatment of Hillary Clinton by journalists who I'd revered for my entire political career with dismay. They were holding out the fact that she wouldn't quit as a crime she was committing, a crime against Barack Obama, a crime against them, a crime against our political system. I wasn't sure. But it rattled me to my core that no one stood up and said anything. She had every right to be in the Democratic primary until it was over. And I had this feeling after ending up in the news myself, after being on the receiving end of a real media frenzy when Sarah Palin was first announced, and fielding questions about the delivery of her children, the maternity and paternity of her infant, the pregnancy of her daughter, where her glasses were made, who made her shoes, how much she spent on clothes, the state of her marriage, her sex life, her love life, and how she could possibly be a mother and a candidate for the vice presidency. I started to think that maybe there was more to say about women in politics, and maybe it could be done in a less threatening way in fiction, where it's all make-believe. So after the 2008 campaign, I told somebody who was writing an article about the 2008 campaign that I was going to write a novel about the first woman president. I hadn't actually written a word. It showed up in Marie Claire and then on page 6, which I know as a new New Yorker that everybody reads. And I got a call from an agent. And I hung up really quickly and thought, oh, God, dodged a bullet. I haven't written a word. He emailed me and he said, I represent some really great women authors. Lauren Weisberger, who you may have heard of, she wrote The Devil Wears Prada. Well, The Devil Wears Prada was the book that inspired me to write about the White House as a workplace of intrigue. So I confessed that I hadn't written too much yet, but I'd be happy to share it with him in a little while. He said, fine. I'm sure he'd heard that before. So 6 weeks later, I sent him my proud first chapters, and they didn't have page numbers or chapters yet. He patiently called me back and said, why don't you put these into chapters and put page numbers on them? And then it'll read more like a book. Yeah, good idea. So I sent him my 6 chapters. He called me 5 days later and said, I only work with people who I love on the page. And I said, I completely understand. You called my bluff. I really hadn't written a book yet, obviously. And he said, I love it. And I think the country has more to say and more to think about in terms of women in politics. I think it's the perfect time to write a novel about the first female president. And I love that you gave her a messy, messy life. Because isn't it the truth that when a woman does it for the first time, when she climbs that hill, she's going to do it with both hands tied behind her back and rain coming down on top of her? Because whenever a woman, I think, has broken through, it's been with an extraordinary set of adverse circumstances. It's been double difficulty if you're a skier. And it's been something that the rest of us who come behind her have stood on those women's shoulders who have broken all the great barriers. And I think we talked at dinner, I always get asked, was the book fiction? I say, yeah. Unless I miss something, yeah, it's fiction. But I hope that won't be the case for too long. So I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about anything else. I can hear you if you want to just shout out. No? Oh, no. There's a system. Oh, okay. Don't shout out. I think they're going to bring you something because they're recording.
Can you give us any insight into what was going on in McCain's camp around the time of the financial crisis when he kind of came back to Washington? And
what did it look like to you?
To me, it looked like somebody who was somewhat confused and uncertain about what to do, and he didn't really stay with his instincts.
In his defense, I think everybody was confused and uncertain about what to do. I think that, it's never a candidate's fault completely when his campaign is chaotic and unorganized, as we were. So I think those two things were not his fault. But I think it was very hard for him to find his sweet spot. I mean, I think he had a lot of political pressure to not be aligned with President Bush. He couldn't be where his opponent was. And so I think he had a hard time figuring out what was the third position. At the end of the day, there really wasn't one. I mean, Democrats and Republicans voted to bail out our economy. But I think that did irreparable harm, obviously. Canceling the campaign, I think, sent a confusing message. I think, throughout our history, all sorts of people, great people, have campaigned during wars and trials, and I think the public expects you to be able to, do two things at once. So I think maybe the first mistake was canceling the campaign to go focus on the crisis. I mean, our opponent looked like he was able to do both, and so it diminished McCain one notch. And then I think the second was there was a lot of confusion. And, the people that go to work on campaigns are not the same people who are experts on credit default swaps. I mean, I broke my BlackBerry Googling everything that everyone was saying. I had no idea what anyone was talking about, and I was writing his statements every day. So, in a campaign plane isn't like Air Force One, as I said. There are no phones, so you're up in the air. You have no idea what's happening. You have no TV. You have no phones. You land, and when that debate was going on, everything changed every 15 minutes. So it was a very chaotic time, and I think at the end of the day, the public had an opportunity to watch the two candidates in the middle of a crisis, which was probably helpful for the voters. I mean, unfortunately, they didn't choose my guy, but it was probably pretty significant piece of why he lost. What do you think?
I think it was a turning point.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. I think they're going to bring you a microphone so that your question is recorded. Sorry.
Can you say what you think the net effect of Sarah Palin's choice on the Republican campaign was? Did she bring anything solid to John McCain's campaign, or was it all publicity values?
Well, campaigns are really never about much solid. You know, campaigns on both sides are about enthusiasm, and they're about energy, and they're about activism. So in her defense, there wasn't, I mean, she brought legitimate gains on all three of those fronts: activism, enthusiasm, and I forgot my last ism. But she did what she could do to animate the Republican side, which was really, really flat. I mean, I'd worked on George Bush's 2 campaigns, which felt entirely different. And I'd read Marlon Fitzwater's book about the father's losing campaign, and it just haunted me. The whole time I was on the McCain campaign, it felt exactly the same. The halls felt the same, and the rallies felt the same, and people looked bored. I'd stand back, and when she came on the campaign, overnight that changed. People were electrified. And whatever you think of her, her charisma is unmatched in American politics. So, you know, she had a positive effect in all those areas, and I think the outcome was determined more by the things we were talking about. You know, I don't think that John McCain lost because he picked Sarah Palin. I think it just made it all a lot more traumatic and messy afterward. Yes, sir. Oh, here they are, right here.
I want to ask you a question that many TV commentators have been asking people in the Republican Party. Other than meeting the constitutional qualifications to be president.
You watch Rachel. You know, I watch Rachel.
Rachel and a lot of
and
other
Rachel's
people.
my friend, and Rachel was one of the earliest advocates and
Then you know the
fans of this
question I'm about to
book.
ask
Go
you.
ahead.
Other than meeting the constitutional requirements, do you believe Sarah Palin is qualified to be
Oh,
president of the
no,
United
absolutely
States?
not. And I didn't then, and I didn't vote for her.
Why don't you believe that? Why do you believe she's not qualified?
I think you have to be exceptional to be president. And I would argue that George Bush was, that his father was, that Clinton is and was, and that Obama is, and she's not. Yes, Ira, save me.
What was the selection process that they used to arrive at her?
I mean, they Googled her. I don't know. I wasn't part of it. I was at the Democratic convention defending my guy, which is never fun. The Democrats do that, too. They come to our convention. We go to theirs. McCain gave them an unachievable goal, which was to totally shake up a losing campaign. You know, it's like fixing a broken company with a figurehead CEO. It doesn't really ever work out. I mean, he wanted to do something outside of the box. He was not excited about his choices. I like to believe that he wanted to pick Lieberman. I think that Lieberman brought out the best things about McCain. He pulled him in. He kind of moderated the heat, and it was a beautiful friendship between the two of them. I thought it would have been exciting and interesting, but at the end of the day, I think he ignored his instincts and went with something that was, politically really exciting and groundbreaking. Which, at one level, I think he deserves credit for doing something like that, for picking a woman, for going so far outside of the box, but. The results speak for themselves,
So you don't think he wanted to out a Hillary?
No, he did. The men believed, there were 4 guys involved, they believed that this was a play for some of the Hillary voters. But I think that's, I think not having a woman in the room hurt that deliberation, because the Hillary voters weren't about Hillary's gender. They were about Hillary's vision. And so, I think that was and frankly, Joe Lieberman would come closer to the Hillary agenda than Sarah. I don't even think Sarah Palin knew what it was. So it was part of the thinking, but I think it was, and they deserve credit for thinking that was something desirable. And those voters were up for grabs for a long time. Frankly, once we chose Palin, that was when they committed to Obama. Best laid plans. Yes. I think they want to have you ask your question on the microphone. I know it slows things down. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you, what woman really inspired you to be so heavily involved in politics?
Yeah.
And what woman would be perfect as a president, that would just describe?
Presidents are never perfect, and the fact that we want
described in your book.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I have to give some of the guys credit for I went to work for Jeb Bush and George Bush because women ran their political worlds. And so, Jeb Bush's chief of staff was a woman named Sally Bradshaw, who was from Alabama, and she just swore in a way that was so awesome. I was like, wow, it's just I'd never met anybody like her before. And she ran circles around everybody else. She was 8 months pregnant. She was just incredible. So, my first Bush experience, I worked for this unbelievable woman who just ran the place, had everybody, including the governor, on a very short leash, and she was amazing. And then I went to work in the Bush White House, which I described was completely dominated by women. So, in my early White House career, I worked for Condi Rice, who was just awe-inspiring. She's so perfect in public, and she's so funny in private that you're like, are you real? I mean, she's amazing. But the White House was full of women like that in positions of, great power. So you were just surrounded, and the president listened to all of them. So it was that whole dynamic of this kind of, woman-dominated, woman-revered, woman-respected workplace that I thought was normal. And it wasn't until, like I said, the end of my political career that I realized, and I never would have given a speech about the fact that I worked in a woman-dominated White House till I realized how rare that was. And so that was what was extraordinary, not what came afterward. As far as a perfect president, there isn't one, but I think. I think Hillary would have been really interesting. I mean, and I said it at both of my other speeches here today that I get to speak about, after having nothing intelligent to say about being a woman in politics for 15 years, I wrote this book and I get invited to speak about women in politics all over the country. And people came up to me. I gave a speech in Amarillo, Texas last Friday, and all these women came up to me afterward and they said, I'm still not over it. And over what? And they, I'm still not over Hillary's, defeat. I think she's proving herself every day why she would have been so great. And I hope we talked at dinner. I mean, I think that Obama has changed things in a lot of ways in that you don't have to be someone in the wings. Obama came on so fast, and by running such a competent campaign, he kind of crossed all that lack of experience off the list of requirements, and we'll never go back, because I don't think even people that aren't happy with him, they don't ever talk about his lack of experience. Once you're on the job, you're presidential. You stand in the room, you're president.
How's the administration with women?
Not, and they'll tell you, not anything like Bush's, and neither was Clinton's. And they'll tell you that, I'm not in there, I don't know. Valerie Jarrett I know she's coming here, and I think she's of incredible influence and import, but I don't think there's that cadre. I think her peer is Michelle Obama, which is amazing, but different from having a Mary Madeline, a Karen Hughes, from having all those women running all the different branches. I think it's a little different.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir.
I admire everything you said about President Bush in terms of bringing women into the White House, but I'm sort of curious to know why he, in appointing Supreme Court justices, didn't select a woman. I believe he had 2 candidates up for Supreme Court justices.
He did. Remember, he picked Harriet Miers, his personal lawyer.
But she really was not a qualified
Correct.
Candidate.
So he tried. Look, this is hard, and I think that Obama's to be commended for putting a woman in there right away. And Bush tried. He tried really hard. I think that Bush was deeply committed to people who had this really pure and strict. It's a small pool, and I think there was a lot of baggage about people that other Republican presidents had picked that hadn't ended up being as ideologically pure. And I think there was a very small pool of candidates, male and female. And he felt the pressure to pick a woman when O'Connor stepped down, and he picked his friend Harriet Miers, who was deemed by the right and the left to be completely unprepared for the assignment. And so, I think if there had been someone, I think he would have, if there had been someone more qualified. I think he had it as a desire. It was just something that he didn't execute well. Yes, sir.
I know your degree is in journalism and not in psychology, but did you see an influence of Barbara Bush in both Jeb and George's administrations?
Of course. I mean, yeah, they she still scares the bejesus out of all of them, and they don't want to piss off any of the women. I mean, yeah, of course. And you see him, 41, just glides around, all smile and love, and she's the one with the eye out, I mean, she's look, all the Republicans kind of, for a long time, had to play this game that I think that Sarah Palin was better than she seemed because she deserved a break. Barbara Bush, right out of the box, send her back to Alaska. Huh. She just, I love her, American treasure. Yeah. Let me get over here.
I'm wondering if you can talk about a little bit about the relationship between McCain and Palin, both personal and professional.
Oh, they liked each other, and I think he'd met her one time before he picked her, but he was proud of her. I mean, for what she had to do in such a short period of time, you couldn't help but be impressed by her high points and, deeply sympathetic about the high stakes kind of gaffes. And so he felt bad for everything that she went through and felt responsible. And I never saw tension between the two of them. I mean, they were only on the campaign together for 60 days and probably only in the same room together, maybe 8 of them. So they didn't spend, and that's how it is. Biden and Obama didn't really get to know each other until they got to the White House. You kind of divide and conquer. So they didn't, it's my understanding that their relationship was, I certainly never witnessed anything that wasn't collegial and warm, and she managed to kind of cut him off. She saw us as operating separate from him, so she never kind of lashed out at him in the way that she lashed out at all of his advisors. She thought that the campaign was kind of a separate entity from him, and so all of her anger was directed at the staff, which is, truly probably a good thing. Did you, yeah? Before I turn around on you again.
I'm wondering if you were prepared for immediately after the Palin announcement, if you could maybe describe how long it was before you got any sleep.
No. I mean, did it look like we were?
No, but I mean, can you just describe the day? I'm sure you didn't sleep for 3 days, and then my second question, if in your career in the White House, was there any one moment where you said, "Wow, I'm so happy I have this job"?
9/11 was a day when everyone I knew wanted to do something. It was like the country had been attacked and everybody wanted to do something. And I remember on that day, a lot of people thought, well, if they're survivors, we'll do so, and that it was such a grim occurrence that there were no survivors, that there was all this tragedy in one morning. The day that I felt like, well, at least I can get in my car and, drive through all the security and go to work. So, I think that was the day where I felt like I'm really lucky that I have this job and I can get up and go do something. Because I think, I talk to people all over the country who would call and say, what can I do? What can I do? And, a lot of, young men enlisted. But, there was a sense if that wasn't an option that you couldn't do anything. So that was the day when I definitely felt and still feel, really lucky that it was my job to go to work. And whatever little thing I did was my little thing I could do. Your other question was a Palin question. Were we prepared? Obviously not. I met her the night before, and was told that the daughter was 7.5 months pregnant at 1 a.m. I said, "Oh," and she'd already been picked. I wasn't going to act worried, and they said, "Well, do you think that's okay?" And I said, "Sure." And I said, how old's the guy? And is Alaska a statutory rape state? Have you vetted it? And they looked at me. They turned white. And they ran and checked, and they came running down. They said, "No statutory rape in Alaska." I said, "Well, there we go. Everything's going to be fine." No, we weren't prepared. No, prepared for nothing. The reporters got there before we did. So that was the night before. I worked on her speech with a brilliant speechwriter named Matt Scully. He and I worked together on her convention speech too, and so her kids flew in that night. And Steve Schmidt, the campaign manager, and I actually told the kids that she'd been selected as vice president. And I was kind of having like an inside heart attack, and she was just like, "Yeah, I'm not surprised." I'm like, "Really? You've never even been in the papers? Whatever." Okay. So the next morning, she got in a van, and we were in the van behind her, and all the reporters were freaking out, and I called my husband and told him. I'm like, "What do you think?" He said, "Oh, I'm Googling her now." "Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. She's," and I said, "Oh, what?" He said, "Well, she's very attractive." And I said, I hope these idiots didn't pick her for that. And we got on the bus after she was announced, and people went crazy. And I remember the guy saying to me, "She only brought one suit, like she's going to need some clothes." And I said, "Why are you looking at me?" And they said, "Well, I'd had an emergency root canal." I said, "I don't have extras." And they said, "Well, she brought one suit. She needs extras. We're not going to let her go home before the convention." This was Friday. The convention started Monday. And they're all looking at me, and they said, "And she needs hair and makeup and a voice coach." And I said, I was speechless. And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "I'll find somebody. I'm going back to New York. I'll see if I can find somebody who can send her a rack of clothes. But you guys are on your own with hair. McCain has hair and makeup. Ask his people. I don't even know how to do the thing with the brush, and I don't know hair people." And so that was the only conversation I was ever involved in clothes. And then I left because I had this emergency root canal. I had like a drainage. I was a mess. And I was only flown out in my ill state because I was a girl. He picked a girl. And when I met up with her on Sunday, this rack of clothes had come in from New York from this personal shopper that brings in all the clothes. And all the kids were in all these Valentino suits, and I remember thinking this might not end well, but they were walking around in Jimmy Choos, and it was just a caper. But no, we were not prepared. No. Yes.
Again, a McCain question. In the media, we always read that he's rather volatile. Is he as volatile person, in private life?
One man's volatility is another one's passion. He's passionate, and the things that bother him, he's totally different from the other politicians I'd worked for in that. He cared a lot about how he was covered. And so, a lot of kind of the frustration that I witnessed. And it was a frustrating campaign. The same thing that Hillary Clinton dealt with, the press pulling so forcefully and publicly and brazenly for the opponent was maddening. He didn't feel like it was a fair fight. And he's a scrappy little, he was little. So I think he was legitimately frustrated. He wasn't, I never saw him, freak out, but he was definitely frustrated for much of the campaign. I think it was a frustrating experience.
I think my second part of the question is Mrs. McCain. Was she a figurehead in his campaign, or was she really actively involved?
She was incredible. I think she's one of the most kind of underrated and like many women, she just kind of gritted it out. I mean, it was really hard. And she, they have 2 kids serving, and then the daughter was on the bus and the plane, kind of running her own little web deal that I never totally got, but she had her own staff, and she had her own hair and makeup people. I mean, and so Cindy was like, she was dealing with her husband, who was very frustrated by all the kind of obstacles to his campaign success. She had her daughter, who was running her website from the campaign plane. She had her own appearances, and she was really impressive. I thought she was amazing, and a really lovely woman. Her passions and her causes are just, kind of like Laura Bush's, just kind of like that quiet, heroic work. She does a lot of Doctors Without Borders, and she was always happiest when she got the heck off the bus and went to South America or went to Africa and did her stuff. But she was amazing, and she was very, she was very cognizant of the challenges we had with Sarah Palin, and tried to be very, very helpful and supportive of me and Steve Schmidt and the campaign leadership. I mean, she, even more than him, kind of understood the special challenges that we had with her, and some of the extra burdens being placed on Palin, and the scrutiny of her clothes and all that stuff. So she was a very constructive and helpful and wonderful ally. In making up my characters, I got a great piece of advice from the same agent that called my bluff. He said, don't be inhibited by what really happened. If this is what would happen to your character, don't not write it, because 10 people or 30 will know that that's true. So I really, it is fiction. I mean, she was very much inspired by Hillary Clinton, in that I thought that what the thread that went through all of Hillary Clinton's public life for me was this extraordinary and unmatched capacity to endure public indignity. And I still think that her period as First Lady is the most fascinating thing in White House presidential history. I mean, I just remember watching that Today Show interview where she said vast right-wing conspiracy, and I remember watching him, and I am a fan of his, and he, Bush 41 loves him, and Bush, I mean, so, I don't have any partisan feelings about either one of them, but I think watching her as First Lady was just so searing to me. And then watching her go through something, even more undignified. Tim Russert, was the giant of the political press corps, and he was furious every night on NBC Nightly News that she was still in the race. So her crime, was not quitting, which I think everybody teaches their kids. Don't give up. It's not over till it's over. So it scrambled all my circuits to watch what happened to her in 2008. So my character is not, a thinly veiled Hillary Clinton, but just kind of that capacity to endure indignities. I think a woman's capacity to do that, in what I've seen, exceeds any male politician's. So, yes.
You had mentioned that you thought...
Oh, I think they want to bring you... Here.
You had mentioned that you thought that never again would an unqualified woman be in that position. What about scary, horrendous Michelle Bachmann, who thinks that the founding fathers did away with slavery and that the shots fired around the world
I know.
were in New Hampshire? But
yeah.
She has raised more money, probably with the Koch brothers of the world shoveling it in. She could end up being the Republican candidate, which is truly scary.
Well, I like to think more of my party to say that we won't nominate her. One great thing about her that I learned recently is that she's been the foster mother to like 27 kids. So, there is always a caricature involved. And I mean, obviously there are troubling gaps in her knowledge of American history, but these are always whole human beings. And, if you are a Republican primary voter, I'm sure you'll have a robust choice of candidates from which to choose. And if you're not, then I don't think you'll be lucky enough to run against Michelle Bachmann. Yes, sir.
Speaking prospectively, among all the 2012 presidential candidates, including the Democrats, which one could call you tonight and offer you a job in their administration?
None. I mean, there's, I occupy, and I'm out of the closet now as occupying this kind of mushy center. None. Nobody would call me. And I offered, I will shop for any one of them that want me to buy them. I actually got invited to all the fashion shows the year after the. She did look good. But no, none of them. I would never work for. I love your governor. I mean, I hope he runs, and I would root loudly from the sidelines. But as George W. Bush says, time served.
You served as communications director to President Bush in his second term, is that right?
So I started in 2001 as a deputy communications director. In 2003, the campaign left, so the re-election campaign moved over to Virginia, and I was the communications director for the re-election campaign for 2 years, and then served as the White House communications director for 2 years after that.
In the second term?
In the second term.
Well, he's a president whose poll ratings pretty steadily diminished throughout his 2 terms.
See, you know this because I told you this.
No, I think
I introduced myself as bringing you the disasters of Katrina and Iraq and Afghanistan.
Given that, and given the fact that the communications director is often the first person who gets the finger pointed at them, to what extent were you under pressure to change the message, change the paradigm, fix the problem? Was Karl Rove in your office expressing frustration?
Honestly, it was stunning how many people thought that the biggest problem with Iraq was the press plan. It was on fire, literally. And everybody thought that the problem with the Iraq war was that we were not communicating effectively. And the other communicators, we would look at each other in these meetings with the TVs on in the background with just horrible, horrible, insurgent violence going on. And we'd say, okay, we'll go work on something else. Are you kidding? What we did propose as the problem was that Bush wasn't being honest enough about how badly things were going. And I think that what Ruth quoted in the beginning was from, which is a real sin in the Bush White House to end up in the paper as being on one side or another, especially if your side wins. But there was a big debate in the White House about whether Bush could regain not make the war more popular or increase support for the war, but gain some credibility again on matters of national security if he were to acknowledge how badly things were going. And this was before the surge. This was 2005 and 2006. So there was a big debate in the White House, and the communicators who kind of got tired of hearing that the problem with the Iraq war was the press suggested these speeches about everything that had gone wrong, in the political reconciliation, in the military operation, in the diplomacy, the disintegration of the coalition. And I don't know if it made a difference, but it certainly made Bush more comfortable to have kind of gotten down to where people were on the war, which was deeply, deeply concerned, and not incorrectly. And then everything turned around a year later with David Petraeus and the surge when things on the ground got better, and that was when support for the war went back up to, I think, where it remains now, above 50%, which is not where it was in 2005. So, no, it was definitely, there were all sorts of people in my office yelling about the press in Iraq. And interestingly, nobody ever worried about Afghanistan. And in 2005 and 2006, Afghanistan is what was falling apart. And, that certainly came home to roost in 2008 and 2009. But, there's not a lot that you can do to talk around things that aren't going well. I mean, I think that's the greatest. People call me going into this White House or going out on campaigns, and they say, do you have any advice? And I always say, don't let the bridge be too far between what you're telling your boss to say and what's actually happening, because people are really wicked smart. and they'll figure it out. And if you try to take them too far from what they can see with their own eyes, they'll leave you. So, right. I think I heard that last week from a new commander-in-chief. Just saying. Okay.
I don't have a microphone, but I think I speak loudly enough.
I think she wants to bring it so they can record you. Sorry.
We should have explained there are people in the other room. They can't hear unless you.
Can you speak about your relationship with the vice president and his relationship with the president that you were able to see from day to day? Mr. Cheney.
Bush and Cheney.
Yeah.
Cheney is a very private guy, and so even in front of Bush, I think with staff in the room, and there's always a difference between staff and principals, he kept his counsel very, very close and very, very private. And, Bush writes about it in his book, how the kind of one of the big things that got between them was the disagreement over how to treat the perjury conviction of Scooter Libby. So that I left before that happened, but it's my understanding that that was, one of the first things that kind of came between the two of them. And, I don't know what to make of reports that they're still great friends. I don't know, guys kind of like when they see each other every day, they're great friends, but I don't picture either one of them like gossiping about what books they're, I can't speak to the nature of their relationship now. But he was, when I was there for 6 years, and he was a trusted, and very discreet and loyal advisor. And I wasn't in the room for enough of the, debates about things where Cheney was kind of an outlier with Rice. And I've read a lot of the accounts that show them kind of pulling in different directions, but I just wasn't a firsthand witness to much of that. Cheney had a pretty funny and dry sense of humor, and they did a whole thing the year that cowboy movie came out, the gay cowboys and Brokeback Mountain, and I think it was the only time I ever wept in the Oval Office was like watching Cheney do this like Brokeback Mountain joke in front of Bush, and he cries, he's a crier, and so he's wiping his nose and crying. So they could be human, but I know it didn't always seem that way.
Michael, I actually want to quote you. It'll probably be a distortion, but the chief political correspondent for NJN, for New Jersey, actually, television, is in the room, Michael Aaron, and he quoted himself before. One time, I don't remember what the occasion was, but he said in this room that this was the room in New Jersey where people came to tell the truth. And I think that you've really had one of those wonderful behind-the-scenes opportunities to hear someone telling the truth, and not because she was forced to, not because she's under pressure to, but because she's just who she is. And it's been just such an honor and a pleasure and a delight getting to know you, and I want you back when you finish the next book. And I do want to say we have lots of authors here, and we say, if you'd like to buy their book. But I want to quote what you told me, can I say, about Andrea Mitchell? Sure. Andrea Mitchell, who called her up and said she was very angry with her because she started to read the book and she had to stay up all night, even though she had to get up at 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning to do the Today Show. It's one of those books that it's really fun and interesting to read, so I recommend it to all of you, and look out for the next volume, and maybe she'll come back and tell you more then. But thank you for being here.